Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 821 for May 31st, 2020. Coming up in a few minutes.
It's like kids. Somebody really wants to grow, so eager. It's just bolts out of the gate. And so you need to just hold it back. You're here for 5 days. Let's go nice and slowly so you lower the temperature. And we have some other barleys that sulk about it. I don't want to grow. I don't feel like being here. So we have to literally just warm it up, make it nice and cozy for them so they can grow. And that's why we're craft malters. The minute that we don't take these to account, we're mass-produced maltings. And our quality, it's relevant then.
Many whiskey lovers have made the pilgrimage to visit their favorite distilleries, but this time around we'll take a trip to an even earlier stage in the making of whiskey. While I was in New Zealand recently, I spent some time with Gabi Mitchell. She and her husband Doug founded Gladfield Malt 16 years ago as a way to add value to the barley from their farm just outside of Christchurch. Now they've become the go-to maltings for New Zealand's brewers and most of the country's craft distillers. Gabi takes us on a tour of the maltings later on WhiskyCast in depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and much more, all on this episode of WhiskyCast.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery. 6 days and nights of protests so far in cities around the U.S. following the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man pinned to the ground by a police officer kneeling on his neck last Monday in Minneapolis. Yes, there is a whiskey connection here. Du Nord Craft Spirits in Minneapolis is located just down the street from the Minneapolis Police 3rd Precinct Police Station that was set on fire Thursday night, and the distillery itself was set on fire shortly after that. Back in March, we talked with Du Nord founder Chris Montana during episode 811, just after he had laid off his entire tasting room staff following the state's lockdown orders as COVID-19 swept through the U.S. This past week, he had just completed his second term as president of the American Craft Spirits Association, the first person ever to be reelected for 2 terms as the association's president. Margie Lehrman is the association's CEO. She and her colleagues started a GoFundMe campaign this weekend to help Chris and his team recover.
For 4.5 hours, the water just dumped just unbelievable amounts of water. Literally just days before that, Mark, he was donating hand sanitizer to the community, including the first responders, the 3rd precinct. So this whole scenario is just beyond comprehension. It is tragic. And Chris, for anyone who knows him, kindest, most thoughtful, good soul. And it's tragic to what happened to the city as a whole with the death of Mr. Floyd. But beyond that, to see one of our own caught in the fray of all this, particularly when he'd be the first to always seek justice. By the way, his team also went through the most horrific scene to get to the distillery to try and save it. And apparently, I should mention this, the side of the building that had signs up that it was African American owned had no fire set on that side. the side that did not have that same language, that's what was set ablaze.
And they got his apartment too, right?
Yes. So Chris was in his apartment, and he had to flee in a burning building because that too was set on fire. So he did report out, actually, that he got his first good night's sleep in days, and we being the ACSA Board of Directors, did not tell Chris we were setting up a GoFundMe for him. We just knew it was the right thing to do, together with ACSA staff, because we are saddened beyond belief by his tragedy and what's happening in the country. And apparently when Chris did get to the hotel and had Wi-Fi and connected this morning, was the first time he saw that the community of alcohol beverage producers and our suppliers are embracing him. And he is so incredibly appreciative for that support. He was not expecting it.
So he's pretty much lost everything now.
Hopefully, Mark, he hasn't lost hope. And I think this is the one thing that this GoFundMe campaign can show Chris, that the community, not just within Minneapolis, who have supported him in his distillery throughout the years, but his family, the alcohol beverage family, is there for him, and we will bolster him and help him in any way that we can. What's left in the distillery, I don't know whether you saw the clips from his interview on CNN. It shows pretty much that the distillery itself was just devastated with that amount of water. Besides his spirits, even the hand sanitizers, you see bottles just floating in just volumes of water.
So far, the ACSA's GoFundMe campaign has already raised more than $35,000, which will help pay for Du Nord's immediate expenses, including the salaries of Chris Montana's team. Chris, his wife, and their 3 kids are safe, and no one else was hurt in either fire. Because the protests are still continuing in Minneapolis, it's not clear when Du Nord's insurance adjusters will be able to get a look at the damage. And it's also not clear whether the property insurance will even cover damages from civil unrest. We've posted a link to the GoFundMe campaign at the WhiskyCast website. But I also want to share with you an example of just how much Chris Montana and his wife Chanel care about their neighborhood. They started a GoFundMe campaign of their own today, not for themselves or Du Nord Craft Spirits, but to help other minority-owned businesses that have also been damaged in the looting and violence. As they put it, we can confidently say that we are supported and will rebuild, but many of our neighbors may not. It's time to get to work. In just the first 7 hours, they've already raised more than $27,000. Their original goal was $30,000. We'll post a link to their campaign as well. And we should note that while there have been large-scale protests in many U.S. cities that have turned violent at times during the past week, this is, so far, the only case we know of where a distillery has been affected. Assuming that there's no sudden increase in coronavirus cases in Kentucky, we are getting closer to the reopening of many distilleries along the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. State officials have said limited tours and tastings can begin starting next Monday, June 8th. While most of the larger distilleries along the Bourbon Trail have not announced any official plans yet, some of the smaller distillers have started to take online reservations for tours. Altec's Town Branch Distillery in Lexington will start offering tours on June 8th, according to its website, while its Dueling Barrels Distillery in Pikeville is scheduled to reopen on June 12th. Wilderness Trail Distillery will reopen June 8th with the release of a new 6-year-old bottled-in-bond wheated bourbon at the distillery's gift shop and a new limit of 10 people at any one time in the Visitors Center. More news out of Kentucky. Sazerac's Buffalo Trace Distillery, which is not part of the Bourbon Trail, has announced on its website that it will reopen for tours and tastings July 1st. However, there will be new requirements to protect both visitors and staff. The number of people allowed on tours and tastings will be limited and will require advance registration. The Buffalo Trace website is being upgraded to make that process possible, and the distillery will announce on social media when reservations are available. Right now, the distillery shop is open for curbside pickup of orders placed at least 1 day in advance. That's also the case at Sazerac's Barton 1792 distillery in Bardstown. As of now, there's no word on when that distillery will reopen for tours and tastings. And one other note, as of now, Woodford Reserve is not taking tour reservations on its website until at least August 1st. We've mentioned before the strict ban on retail alcohol sales in South Africa because of COVID-19. That ban is expected to be relaxed starting this week after 2 months as the country moves to level 3 of its 5-step plan, though alcohol sales will still be restricted to certain days and hours. Bars and restaurants remain closed indefinitely. In other news, back in February, we talked with Scotch Whisky Association CEO Karen Betts about the SWA's Environmental Impact Project. While the formal update to the original 2009 strategy plan is still in the works, the association released its latest sustainability tracking report this week. That report is based on 2018 data and shows Scotch whisky production sites have cut their greenhouse gas emissions by 1/3, while improving water efficiency and sourcing more than 25% of energy demand from renewable energy sources. However, one area shows signs of backsliding a bit, the goal of reducing overall packaging weight. There, the overall weight has increased, with the use of heavier glass bottles and more premium packaging in recent years. SWA officials were not available for interviews this week. We do have new whiskeys to mention, though. Wild Turkey is out with Eddie Russell's latest Master's Keep edition. It's a 17-year-old bottled-in-bond bourbon that was matured at Wild Turkey's Camp Nelson rickhouses. It's only the second time Wild Turkey has ever released a bottled-in-bond bourbon. It'll be available in limited amounts for around $175 a bottle. Lafroig officially unveiled this year's Kerchis edition during its virtual Fégil celebration Tuesday. It's a blend of Lafroig casks using second-fill ribby port barriques and whiskey matured first in ex-bourbon barrels, followed by a period in red wine casks. It's available now in the UK and Europe, and will be available in the US later this summer. No word yet on pricing. Compass Box quietly released its latest whiskey during the lockdowns with no overt promotion. Rogue's Banquet actually came out in March, but as Compass Box founder John Glazer told us on this week's Whiskey Wednesday webcast, he and his team thought it would be inappropriate to make a big deal about a new whiskey at that point, so they released it to distributors with no fanfare.
Built around an old parcel of malt whiskey from Milton Duff Distillery. Older than 19 years old is all I can tell you, because of the laws on such things, but considerably older. And then it's buttressed with a touch of Clynelish and some very old grain whiskey from the North British Distillery.
Compass Box Rogue's Banquet carries a recommended retail price of £180 a bottle in the UK. U.S. pricing in 750 ml bottles has not been announced. Meanwhile, Ireland's Waterford Distillery marked a milestone this week with its very first bottling run since distilling began at the end of 2015. The distillery bottled 3 different single-estate whiskies, each one with barley from a different farm, as part of founder Mark Rainier's pursuit to prove that terroir exists in whiskey. Waterford had to postpone its first open day and debut bottling from late April because of the pandemic, and because pandemic-related shipping delays meant the bottles didn't arrive in time.
As you know, any distillery, that getting the thing going and the time and the effort and the trials and the tribulations, but just coming to our great moment, and we had the rug pulled from under our feet. So that was very annoying for morale more than anything else.
You can watch the entire conversation with Mark Rainier and John Glaser on our Whiskey Wednesday webcast replay. It's available on our YouTube channel and the WhiskyCast Facebook page. By the way, Waterford has also signed on with a U.S. importer. Glass Revolution Imports plans to have the first U.S. bottlings of Waterford whiskey available at the end of this summer. Barrel Craft Spirits is launching a new series of private release whiskeys. There will be 24 unique bottlings in the series, with all 24 based on the same 18-year-old Kentucky whiskey. Each of the 24 bottlings is finished in a different type of barrel, ranging from Canadian ice wine to Armagnac, Calvados, and other wines and spirits. Barrel is also releasing batch 24 of its barrel bourbon next week, with a blend of high rye bourbons ranging from 9 to 15 years old. There's no word on pricing. As we first reported on this week's Whiskey Wednesday webcast, Alchemist Events has canceled the whiskey show set for this August in Melbourne, Australia, because of COVID-19 issues. It'll be replaced with a virtual whiskey show instead. The technology goes back to last year when Alchemist's David Legoff and his team replaced their printed show programs with a smartphone app. Now they've upgraded the app to provide a virtual festival experience with samples being shipped directly to a consumer's home.
Virtual tastings, as you know, have been around for years and years. I'm sure you remember the old Twitter tastings. So we wanted to create a complete show experience. We spent a bit of money and upgraded the app to allow for embedded videos. We could then have one-click shopping, because we always have a pop-up shop at the shows. So the idea was that somebody would get these samples in the mail. Normally at a show, you're dispensing 5 to 7 mils per whiskey, because you've got hundreds to try. So here we thought we'd give everybody 10 mils, which was pretty much double what they would have. And they would look at the whiskey, look at the name, go to the app, find the bottle, watch a little video, which is essentially the brief we gave the brands was to pretend that you're across the table from somebody at the show and give them your spiel. So 1 to 3 minutes. We could also then have other videos about the distilleries themselves if they had them available. Then they could try the whiskey, watch the video, rate it on the app, and then one-click purchase if they wanted to buy the bottles.
David Legoff expects to keep offering the virtual festival option even after physical events are allowed to resume. The hardest part of the whole thing? Sourcing 28,000 sample bottles and breaking down full-size bottles into those 10 ml samples. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. The news is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, where they're making hand sanitizer as well as whiskey right now, and donating the hand sanitizer to hospitals and first responders to help fight the spread of the coronavirus. Heaven Hill urges you to join the fight, stay home, stay safe, and enjoy one of their 360-degree virtual warehouse tours, guided tasting experiences, and Season 1 of the Tales from the Hill podcast. You'll find them all at heavenhilldistillery.com. Think wisely, drink wisely. We have another great lineup on tap for this week's live webcasts. Rachel Berry of Glendronach, Ben Riach, and Glenglassaugh distilleries will join me on Whiskey Wednesday, along with Angela Forsgren Durazio of Sweden's Macmira Distillery and Peter Mulryan of Blackwater Distillery in Ireland. Friday, whiskey writers Clay Whitaker and Brad Jaffe will be part of our weekly Writers' Roundtable. We start the webcasts at 5 p.m. New York time, 10 p.m. UK time, and 2100 GMT elsewhere in the world. You can watch and share your comments live on the WhiskyCast Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and on Twitter and Periscope. Time now for the calendar of events presented by Catoctin Creek Distilling. We've already mentioned the cancellation of the Whiskey Show in Melbourne, Australia this August. So far, that's the only update we've received this week. As of now, Bonhams is still planning to go ahead with its live whiskey auction in Edinburgh, Scotland, June 10th. the Beer, Bourbon, and Barbecue Festivals in Wilmington, North Carolina, June 6th, and National Harbor, Maryland on June 20th have both been canceled, while the June 26th and 27th festival in Timonium, Maryland is still on for now. We mentioned the July 1st reopening of Buffalo Trace to visitors during the news. The distillery is now accepting registrations for its Great Buffalo Chase 5K race on July 4th. As of now, Whisky Live in Brisbane, Australia is still on the schedule for July 10th and 11th, along with Whisky Live in Perth, August 7th and 8th. The Black Bourbon Society's Urban Bourbon Weekend, planned for July 31st through August 2nd in Louisville, has been canceled, while Royal Malt Whiskies is still planning to hold its annual Whiskey Fringe in Edinburgh, August 7th through the 9th. However, they do admit there may still be a need to postpone it to a later date, depending on government restrictions. A final decision is expected later in June. Whiskies of the World is still scheduled to take place in San Jose, California, August 7th, and in San Francisco the next night. Once again, all schedules are up in the air right now and could change at the very last minute depending on the coronavirus. Please check with event organizers before buying tickets or making any travel plans. We keep the calendar at WhiskyCast.com updated as we get new details from event organizers. And if you're responsible for planning a whiskey-related event, please use the contact form at our website to keep us updated on your plans. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of Virginia's most awarded spirits. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states and 3 continents, and online, too. Visit the Where to Buy page at CatoctinCreekDistilling.com to find a retailer near you. And please, drink responsibly.
From deep in the north, far beyond the wall, the howl of the frozen wind brings word of something new. A whiskey from the land of always winter, for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast In Depth is brought to you by Mortlock. We talk about malt a lot when it comes to whiskey. Of course, single malts are made with 100% malted barley, but virtually every whiskey is made with at least a small amount of malt. That's because corn, rye, wheat, and other grains that can be distilled into whiskey don't always have a lot of the natural enzymes that help convert starches in the grain into sugars that can then be converted into alcohol during fermentation. Malted barley is just full of those enzymes, and adding it to a mash bill reduces the need to use enzyme additives in mashing. Of course, back in the day, virtually every distillery in Scotland had its own floor maltings. Now just a handful of distilleries have them, and they still have to rely on commercial maltsters for most of their grain, just as other distillers around the world do. The thing is, you generally don't find malt producers on the tour map, so they can be a bit of a mystery. We're going to go behind the scenes at a maltings, specifically Gladfield Malt in Leiston, New Zealand. It's about an hour outside of Christchurch. And while I was in Christchurch recently for Dramfest 2020, I had a chance to visit Gladfield and tour the place with Gabi Mitchell. Gabi and her husband Doug founded Gladfield Malt 16 years ago. The Gladfield Farm has been in Doug's family for 5 generations, and the maltings gave them a way to add value to the barley they were growing. Now Gladfield has become a key supplier to New Zealand's brewers, and the growth over the last 10 years in craft distilling has created a whole new market for their malt, not only in New Zealand, but in Japan and other countries. Just a quick note. While the malting process starts with steeping the grain in water, then germination, followed by drying, our tour of Gladfield Malt takes these steps just a bit out of order.
That's how we started, just a single shed. We thought that was big enough, but sheds are never big enough, are they? And that's 16 years ago, and yeah, slowly people understood what we're trying to do and follow us to today, which is awesome. I'll take you to the lab first because we feel that's the heart of the maltings, because without knowing the barley that we're using, without knowing the malt that we're selling, you have nothing. So so you saw the office, which all the action happens regarding selling and the service part of our business, but now we'll see the real McCoy. Hi, friend.
Hi, Gabi.
I've got Mark and Tom here.
Hi.
Mark's from America, yeah?
Yes.
Does whiskey podcasts. So, Parem is our lab technician.
Nice to meet you.
She's from India, top girl. What are we doing here today, Parem?
Testing with an ear.
So the lab, so it's not a big lab, but has everything for any size maltings. And that was something that was hurting at the beginning because we had to invest the same amount of money for maltings 5 or 6 times bigger than us. So that was something that we had to work on cash flow. But you see here, so this is the accepted line. So this is all barley or grains that we buy from our growers and contract it out. And they give us a sample at harvesting time. Parem test it and for moisture, for protein and germination. Once we're happy with what we see, we accept the line. But we don't take the line. So we don't take the line until we are ready to malt it. So we pay storage increments to our growers. So they hold that barley on their farm. And when we are ready to malt that line, we bring it in. We bring the malt, the barley sample, which was the harvest sample, and then we compare both the truck sample and the one that's in here to make sure that's the same barley. So we keep that consistency. From there, it goes through the malt house to the malt process. We don't mix barley varieties. We believe that we actually really like paddock to paddock or farm to farm to use on our maltings. We are small enough to do that, but we do blend at the end. So we let the barley be for germination process and the kilning, but at the end we then blend it with other batches to ensure that consistency, because there was the feedback that we had from brewers at the beginning with that we don't want the best malt in the world, we don't want the worst malt in the world, we want the same malt. And we learned that by blending and making sure we have bigger batches. So instead of having 60-ton batches, we have 120-ton batches. And that helps for that consistency. So the chance of the brewer to use that same batch again will help.
Is there a difference with the distillers? Would they prefer to have the best grain, or would they prefer to have single estate grain?
Yeah, it's a mix. We have distillers that want to know the origin and which paddocks it comes from, and we welcome that question. And we welcome that separation as well. We can easily do that. But most of them want that consistency. They want to have the same grain, especially between seasons. Right now is a tricky time for us as maltings because we're still malting old season and bringing in the new season. We just need to make sure that we can marry those two and go in a smooth transition. So the brewer shouldn't notice, and that we're very proud of that. So with the hops, for example, everyone talks about the new season, but with malt, if you talk about seasons, we're not doing our job properly because they shouldn't change.
What about the climate here in South Island makes it perfect for barley?
Yes, it's a maritime climate to start off, so we have cool mornings and long days. So we've got the equinox down here, so we've got very long growth for the barley, so long sunshine hours. And the beauty about it is when the growth is ripening, which is around November, December, we have the beautiful, hopefully most of the time we have a nice summer, and then nice sunshine. Here it doesn't get dark until 10 o'clock at night, so the barley has plenty of time to ripe. And most importantly is the northwest wind that comes in from the Tasmania Sea and then dump all the moisture into the west coast and comes in here nice and dry. which ripes the paddocks or the barleys on a paddocks without us having to add any further processing, which is the drying process post-harvest. And for that, reflects on clean, as you probably can see here. It's very clean. It's no black spots. It's no fungus activity in these, so no ergot. It's very golden colour and reflects on a malt, and we believe it reflects on an end product as well.
And it has a lot of the enzymes and everything that you want when you're brewing.
Yeah, got everything there. That's the way we don't accept and we don't make anything with low that 98-99% germination vigour. We're very fastidious about that. Sometimes the barley needs time to get there, so we just have to wait for dormancy to break through, and that's the juggling act. We kind of want it to come in with the new season, but we need to wait until that barley is ready. Yeah.
So what's next?
Okay, what's next? Let's go and have a look at the plant process. So I'll show you our smoker, which is it's good that no one can see it, but it's a top secret of Gladfield how we do it. It's, as I was saying, we have peat and we do Manuka smoke malts as well. So we designed this box here, which is still very manual, but something that we can change. That basically you start your peat fire in there, and obviously you don't want a fire, you want a smouldering, and you have a lovely person in here making sure that comes in as feeds to the right speed, so you don't get too much flame, and too little. So it is an art. It's not everyone that can do it. We have a couple of staff members that are pro at it, and they don't mind. It's nice and warm here. So that here goes direct to the ducting of the germination box. So you have all that smoke into the germination box. So all that smoke gets with the barley, absorbed through the husk, and that's where you get the flavour.
Now I know you're using South Island peat, but tell me about the Manuka and what that does, because that's New Zealand unique.
Yeah. Yes. Manuka has been a wood that we use for smoking for generations here in New Zealand. It's in plenty supply. But what we decided to do is bring that flavour of, you have a lot of bacon smoking here, fish, like we've got beautiful trout and salmon here. They all get smoked with the Manuka chip. And that brings that nostalgic smell and aroma that we thought, why not translate that into a whiskey or even a beer? We have a lot of clients that use that for their Scotch ales and other beers that they use, the Rauch beers. So we get the chips actually quite fine, and when we come in here, very similar to the peats, very fine, and so we pre-wet it, so it's nice and wet, so it doesn't going to take off on you, and then we add it in here and smoke slowly. But the smoke phenols are not as high as you can achieve with peat, because we believe the Manuka is not doesn't offer that much, even though we put a lot of chip through it. But we got on that 13 to 17 phenol levels on that Manuka, but it's the flavours that we get that we're quite happy with.
And what are the differences with South Island peat?
Well, that's a mystery to a lot of people. We don't know. Now, we just started making this whiskey, and Japan took us our first 3 batches. They said, I'll take everything you make. So now we finally caught up in production that we can offer to the New Zealand and more local distillers, for them to have a go and tell us how that stack up with other countries' peat. But what we feel so far with the Japanese feedback is that it's good as anywhere.
And it's not having to ship barley all the way from Scotland either.
No, and that's something that's quite dear to our heart. I mean, we encourage export and import because we do it ourselves, but we do believe that New Zealand can do the Southern Hemisphere very nicely, and perhaps we can ship our peat up to America or Canada or even Scotland one day if the flavours are unique. And the distillers should strive to find uniqueness and what is actually good for them, and if it can be locally sourced, why not?
The wind today is good for drying the grain, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's the wind in New Zealand. It's one thing about this island is, it's a very small island with a big malting range in the middle. So you have very volatile weather here. So being a cropping farmer in New Zealand, you need to have nerves of steel because you will sometimes have 4 seasons in one day. So you have to plan precision farming here. So they're not cowboys. They know exactly what they're doing.
And your husband Doug is a 5th generation grain farmer here, right?
Yes, he is. And yeah, when I first met Doug, he had this really vision to start Gladfield with his own barley and making sure that he can add value and give this to the kids. But most important is to carry on that knowledge of growing barley. As the dairy crept in on our area, there's a lot of cropping farmers that went to dairy, and we felt that it would be a shame of that knowledge of, as I said, precision farming, understand the weather, understanding what's next, and when it's time to go, you just go. And we wanted to keep that and retain for our next generation and hope many to come.
And the malting was a natural outgrowth of that, so to speak.
Yeah, we did a lot of sheep as well, so we had 1,200 breeding ewes here, and we felt maybe we could do, lambs, sell lambs to supermarkets. But people try that before, and it's very hard to compete with giant abattoirs and most, very deep pockets. We felt no one was doing barley or malt, so to speak. It was a reason. It's not easy. We had to break barriers of... the most important is credibility, and respect. And credibility and respect, you don't ask for it, you earn it. So it's time, and the only thing that we can ask is to be consistent on our values and be consistent in what we do. And obviously looking after our growers to making sure they believe in what we do and want to be part of it. And also our clients to understand that what we're trying to do is not just a multinational malting company that you are just a number. We are here, we have that straight relationship. You can talk to the owners. I do all the sales for my business. Doug does all the director, making sure that we are going on the right track, and he's the head malter, and obviously the grower himself. So you have that good relationship, I feel, for distillers to feel like you got yourself a partner instead of just a supplier, and we got the best interest at heart to make you grow. So when our clients win awards and medals, we feel like, that's an awesome thing. We help them get there. Obviously, it's all their charm and all their hard work, but we want to feel that we are there for them.
How much grain do you go through a year?
Quite a lot. Just keep the farmers around us pretty happy. So with the roaster, we decided to invest that. It's about 7 years ago. We've been going for 16 years. So bringing a roaster in. It's the first roaster in New Zealand. Most of these products that we're making was never made in New Zealand. So we had a very kind of a pole position to set the bar. It's a 1-ton capacity roaster. It's a drum roaster. It's purposely designed for Gladfield. So we went with Ravos, which they are from Czech Republic. They are not new at this, but as you know, Germans take they've been doing it for longer than Ravos, but Ravos wants to punch above their weight and wants to get a name. We found that they were willing to listen to our design and our feedback, so we got 100% recirculation or heat recovery, so we can recirculate heat. So we then, with that saving, we then take 5 hours to makes our crystal malts. Most maltings around the world is about 3, but we then do 100% saccharification. So every grain of our crystal malts are crystallized. So you don't have whole grains, so to speak. So they're all being melted, saccharified, and all being crystallized. And again, that pillars, the quality, the consistency, and the service. It's everything we do has got those 3 on our minds that we need to achieve. So buying a roaster that can help us achieve that, not costing us an arm and a leg, and at the same time being very easy to use. We've got 17 staff here, and 10 of them can operate this machine if they need to. And that was a bonus because, as I said, was no other machine like this in New Zealand ever operated. So we had to teach new people, and being able to easy operate was quite important.
And you've been able to create jobs by doing this.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when our neighbours, dairy farmers, they want to employ someone, they just put an ad in a paper and anyone can milk cows, so to speak. Not everyone does well, but as a simple process. But when we advertise for jobs, we want people, their attitude is more important than their job experience. So we have a 19-year-old that works for us up to, a 55-year-old. If you're willing to learn and have the appetite to, make a career out of it, that's a good spot. Yeah.
So this does the roasting part. Obviously, you're not smoking in here, but you could, right?
I don't think we could. It'll be a process to add a smoke into that roast. It's actually sealed to allow the
You're using heat, not smoke.
Yeah. So yes. So we don't use we only use smoke purposely. So what we do for kilning, for example, like in the past, that's what peat smoke comes from, because they're using peat as a source of heat to dry the malts, and that's Scotland did that for since pretty much many years ago, generations. But as the malt evolved, they learned that the peat you couldn't do anything else other than whiskey and a very hard beer to drink, 100% peat. So they had found other sources of heating to dry the kiln, which now is can do electric. For us here, we heat water, so it's a boiling water that we use that goes through a radiator. The air goes through a radiator, and the air is hot, and that cleans. So it's no elements of flavours coming from that air. So if you want to add that flavour, we have this Toku today smoker, which is a join into where the air goes into the germination box. So that's where the flavour is going to come from.
I've never heard of anybody using a radiator system. I've heard of people using natural gas heat and coke that doesn't impart any smoke, things like that to it, but I've not heard of anybody using a steam radiator to dry the grain. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we are unique, but it's very economical. So we use coal to heat the water, and I'll show you the boiler, and that boils the water, and that goes through pipes to the radiator, and we can heat up to, if we need to, up to 100, 120 degrees if you have to. Very short time though. Majority is around that 80, 85 degrees, but you can lift it up to finishing, for example, a Munich malt or an ale malt on a higher end above 100. Yeah, I'll show you. We'll go this way. What you see here, this is the coal bin. So that's got an auger that slowly feeds into the burner. And you see these pipes that going into the shed, that's all hot water. And then from there it goes into the radiator. And the fan, which is drawing air from outside, passes through the radiator into the germination box, and you get a kilning process. So in these old plants here, the original plant, we do germination kiln vessels, so it's all in one place. So we germinate and then we kiln it for the drying process of the malt, all in one place. The second plant that we built 4 years ago, that is germination boxes, and then you transfer the green malt to a kiln, and it's kilned separately. And it's basically because we need to upgrade, and we also needed to produce more. And these style allow us to gain 1 day in the process, and that was it was attractive for us. That makes a lot of sense if you can speed up the process without hurting the quality.
Yeah, that's right. We can kiln it in 1 day, which in here you need 2 days because the germination bed is 18, very humid. So you had to dry all these before you get to the drying process of the grain itself. Before you're drying the equipment. And here the kiln always stays clean and dry. So when the barley arrives there, it's straight on drying. So you cut it a whole 24 hours. And also heating resources, we can use it a lot less. Okay. Yeah. But now, as you the ward is aware. We're all looking for looking after the environment. So we've got a lot of initiatives here at Gladfield to hopefully one day not use coal. It's very hard source of energy to substitute because it's very cheap and very effective. It's been doing like that for many generations as well. But as we see the world is changing, they want to know more and they want us to be more efficient and look after our planet. So we got hydro power here, which is pretty good compared to footprints of other sources of energy around the world. But we got a lot of wind here, so wind power is something that we want to kind of look into in the future. And we can do biofuel and think outside the square, and also barley straw perhaps to feed these boilers. And so there's a lot of initiatives that we're looking. It all costs money and takes time, so we're just going to be ready when the time is ready to implement it. But remember, clients are not prepared to pay more for this. It's expected for us to do it and the prices stay the same. So it's something that we need to walk that very carefully, because it's no use being green but being bankrupt. So.
And you want to do it before the government tells you have to and eat the cost then, right?
That's right. It is talks like they've got a carbon emission scheme tax here. So it's for when you use a lot of carbon, you pay a lot of tax, for example, with the coal. So we're paying a lot more tax this year than we ever have. So we saw this as a big sign for us. We have to do something. What? Very little research on it, but hopefully we'll partner with the right people and they can help us out on that.
Yeah, like today, the wind would do a good job creating some energy.
Yes, yeah. We're doing a lot of research. Apparently it's the consistency of the wind, not so much the strength of the wind. So we have a business at the moment doing analysis of our wind speed here to see if it is consistent enough. So fingers crossed that will be something that we could put. Will look good in the paddocks as well. It's something that we'll be very proud if it will come to tuition.
So these are all silos over here now, right?
So they are a storage silo. This is mainly for Gladfield Farm storage. As I said, we just get the growers to store it for us and we pay storage increment. But when it arrives, so we as Gladfield Farm, we'd only do about 2% of our production, and that's a big turnaround from being 100% when we first started. So the business had grown. I mean, the clients understood what we're trying to do and come right behind us.
How much has the distilling industry meant to you in terms of being able to make whiskey from your barley now?
Whiskey always being one of those amazing drinks. I mean, growing up is very expensive. And Dad used to grab the whiskey out on special occasions. It was something that wasn't very. It's a very high end enjoyment beverage. So to be able to go around and drink a whiskey that I know that's Doug and I malt in there, man, that's probably the best you can get, really, and get the feedback from the distillers, because we had to learn. We didn't know much about the distilling industry and what the distillers were after. We understood the brewing by then. Distilling we had to learn, especially with the varieties. Can we make this work? And distillers to come back to us and say, this is the best malt in the world, and look, this is the award that I won with it. It's a very satisfying position to be in. So with the new plant, this is the bigger boiler. So it's actually a custom made for us. There's no boiler this size in New Zealand. That is for hot water. So it's not proper boiler is not quite the right terms, but it's a hot water producer, so to speak, because it doesn't make steam. And then we made decision to add a feature of biofuel if we could do it, because the government was quite invested on biofuel, but the prices are not quite there yet for us to use it. But yeah, that's something that we can look into in the future.
And this is what you use for steeping, right?
That's for kilning. So that's for the drying stage of the maltings, and that's where you need a lot of energy. But that's only a 24-hour cycle here. So it goes in at 9 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock the next morning, the next lot coming in. So it's very effective.
So where do you generate your hot water for steeping?
So the water we're very well, you probably know New Zealand is an amazing country for water resources. We have an amazing water aquifer underneath us. It's actually a massive river that runs underneath us. We're very shingle base soil here. So all our water is underground from our own bores that we had for the farm. Now we use it. So I know, I've been around maltings around the world, that their biggest cost is water. For us, it's only the energy to pump the water under the ground. And we don't abuse it. We have a pond where we put all the water that we use from that pond, which is sealed. From that pond, we irrigate it back into the soil. So we're very cautious about this. This is what makes us unique. We need it for irrigating the crops as well, to keep that consistency on the grain. So we look after.
Let me get this straight. So you take the water after it's been used for steeping and then pump it back into the field?
Yeah, so used for irrigators. So when the barley is just sprouting or growing, goes back, and it's quite unique water. It's not, does it smell very nice, because you can't help but grain going in there. But hey, it's got quite fertile water that we're putting back into it. Yeah. Because you're putting all those elements from the grain right back into it. It's like a natural fertilizer. 100%. Yeah, it's a good synergy. Doug works very hard to understand the whole. You know, he's not he looks at the thing in a bigger bird eye view, so to speak. You know, he looks at where is our constraint and where we can make it a big difference here. Not so much on our economy, as in Doug and I economy, but it's our workers' economy, our growers' economy, the brewers' economy, and now the most important one that we focus on is our environment economy. So what can we do to change, lead the pack, or wait until there's enough resources there for us to jump in and make a difference.
How many hectares do you farm here?
We got a 500-acre farm.
Okay.
So it's probably not a big chunk of land compared to if you go south from here, you get bigger farms and beautiful soil. I mean, we have farmers that are professionals at it. That's all they do. They have the gear. They understand their soils. They have these harvest on GPS that tells everything what's happening, what's the moisture that barley has come through the harvester. They have tractors of non-tillage, so a lot of our growers it's direct drilling, so it's not a lot of work in the ground. So that all the worm life, all the microorganisms, all life there, undisrupted, ready for the second crop to grow. Yeah.
So what's next?
So we'll go up there. Here, you probably can see on that window, we have a flatbed of malt, which is now we can call a malt. It's been germinated. So that's the kiln. So I'm going to open these. It's going to be quite warm.
Warm and humid.
Yes, a lot of moisture coming out of the grain right now. So it's the beginning of the kilning. So you have those vents. So 6 vents that all this air can go out. And that means that we are just bringing fresh air in, moisture air out. But you need a lot of heat because you need to keep getting the grain warmer. When you hit breakthrough, so breakthrough is the same, so the air comes from underneath it. So it's the same temperature that the below bed and above bed. When they're on the same temperature, you can then shut those vents and start recirculating. So and then when you go from 54 degrees, jump up to 70, just like that.
How deep is the grain here?
Oh, it's about 1.2 deep.
1.2 meters?
Yes, meters. Yeah.
So about 3.5 feet.
Yeah, not too deep. You see it spread it nicely. There's a machine, so this machine in the middle, which is called gantry, that spreads the grain as the grain come up from that top chute. So it's no people walking in here. They just monitor. And you only come in here once it's time to unload, but it's right at the end when you're just going to sweep it up the walls to make sure that it's all clean for the next lot.
How long does it take to dry this room?
Yeah, there's 24 hours in here. Yeah, which is amazing. The fan that we bought to generate the air to come in here, we couldn't buy in New Zealand. It had to come in from overseas. And so the size of these build was quite amazing. Yeah, so this control panel here tells you, so 65 degrees the below bed, and the above bed is 44 degrees. So you see what I mean? We're trying to make those two the same temperature because it means there is no wet spots. And if these wet spots are there at the end, you're going to have mold on your malt, and you don't want that. That's part of the quality as well. So yeah, so you keep heating. So you got that's what the water coming in at the radiator is 141 degrees. So you can heat that water pretty high, and our outside temperature is just 15 degrees. So that has to be hotter because the air that's coming, it's very cold to achieve these here. And you have, it's all about segments. So the first segment is, okay, we'll reach 65, and then you go to 75, and it's slowly increasing up to the 90. And every malt starts the same, even distillers. The only different distillers will be the variety. They all start germination for 5 days, come into this kiln. For this process, is no malt difference there. Now, towards after the breakthrough, that's when we start building flavours, and that's where we can say, okay, how much flavour do you want? Munich, for example, lots of flavour, so we will then heat it up and for longer. And distiller's malt is more like Pilsner malt, so it's not a lot of flavour built up, like toastiness flavour, so you won't get so much heat, and it'll be a shorter kilning regime.
And after it's dry, that's when it would go to the roaster.
The roaster is two different process. So for the roaster, for example, the crystal malts is the green malt that goes in there, not the kiln malt. But biscuits and brown malts, if you ever had a beer that has biscuits, it's come from the kiln malt. So we grab the dry malt and goes up into the malt roaster hopper, and then we just dry it even further. So it's a Munich on steroids, so to speak.
There's still a lot left to cover in our tour of Gladfield Malt, and we'll pick up with the second half of the tour on the next episode of WhiskyCast. I'll also talk with Gabi Mitchell about their plans for the family's next generation. Our special thanks go to Michael Fraser Milne and his entire team at Whisky Galore in Christchurch, New Zealand, for arranging our visit to Gladfield Malt while I was their guest recently for Dramfest 2020. And that's WhiskyCast in Depth, brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the latest release from the Glenlivet. It's Caribbean Reserve Single Malt, in which part of the whiskey was finished in rum casks. It's bottled at 40% ABV, and the nose has notes of apples, bananas, hints of pears and toffee, and just a touch of brown sugar. The taste has a good balance of toffee, clementine oranges, vanilla, and a touch of citrus fruits. The finish, long, fruity, and gentle. I'm scoring the Glenlivet Caribbean Reserve a 92. Ireland's Blackwater Distillery has just released Velvet Cap. It's a sourced whiskey that's married in casks that had previously been used for both rye whiskey and stout beer. Velvet Cap is bottled at 40% ABV. The nose is malty with red apples, honey, toasted caramel, cooked fruits, and just a hint of oatmeal. The taste is thick, oily, and fruity with red apples, dried fruits, touches of clove, allspice, and ginger, and just a bit of caramel candy in the background. The finish is long and well-balanced between lingering spices and fruity touches. I'm scoring Velvet Cap Irish Whiskey a 90, and Blackwater's Peter Mulryan will be one of our guests on this week's Whiskey Wednesday webcast. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey and its new Brewer's Select Rye Ale Barrel Finish. It's a collaboration between Sagamore Spirit in Maryland and Sierra Nevada in California, where they filled Sagamore Spirit barrels with their red ale beer, then shipped the barrels back to Maryland to give Sagamore Spirit Rye a unique touch. Look for it now at select retailers, and get the whole story at SagamoreSpirit.com. I mentioned the new Balcones Texas Bock Straight Malt Whiskey on the show a couple of weeks ago. It's a collaboration between Balcones and Spetzel Brewery, which makes Shiner Bock beer. Spetzel provided Balcones with the proprietary mash bill it uses to make Shiner Bock, along with the same lagering yeast. And since Shiner Bock uses more than one type of grain, Balcones Texas Bock is officially a straight malt instead of a single malt whiskey. The nose is aromatic and woody, with toasted oak, walnuts, orange peel, subtle spices, and a hint of maple syrup. The taste has a good balance of spices and fruity notes of strawberries and orange peel, along with a hint of maple syrup. The finish has a good balance between the lingering spices, fresh berries, and a soft oakiness. My next step with this one is to get some Shiner Bock beer and taste the two side by side. But for now, I'm scoring the Balcones Texas Bock Straight Malt Whiskey a 93. Finally, let's look at one of the latest releases from Barrel Bourbon. Batch 21 is bottled at 53.2% ABV. The nose has a nice toasted sweetness with notes of caramel, charred oak, molasses, a hint of honey, and muted spices. The taste is spicy with cinnamon, black pepper, and allspice notes that fade slowly to reveal sweeter notes of honey, caramel, and brown sugar underneath. The finish is nice and long with a good balance of spice, honey, caramel, and just a hint of charred oak. I'm scoring Barrel Bourbon's Batch 21 a 92. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. I'm adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of 2,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at WhiskyCast.com.
The search never ends, but it's nice when you can come in for a landing, pause and explore the silky smoothness of single pot still Irish whiskey, matured in the finest bourbon and Oloroso sherry casks. Land on Redbreast, then be sure to pass it on. Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Lot 40. More comments on our poll question a couple of weeks ago about whether you'd be willing to buy your whiskey in plastic bottles to help cut down on the carbon impact of glass in whiskey bottling. Stephen Kohut at SKohut18 on Twitter shared this comment from Canada. One way to help reduce the glass could be to allow distillers with tasting rooms to have guests bring their own decanter to fill up straight from the tap on a by-the-ounce or milliliter pricing model. Stephen, that's a great idea, especially in areas where regulators would allow it, but it would probably have a potential audience limited to consumers who live close to a distillery. During our Whiskey Wednesday webcast the other day, Waterford Distillery founder Mark Rainier talked at length about his team's experiments to prove that terroir exists in whiskey. Well, not everyone agrees. Alan Anderson, Whiskey Alan on Twitter, is a longtime distiller in Scotland and tweeted this after our webcast. Terroir isn't a new concept in whiskey making. You get what the land gives. Yeast, on the other hand, has a massive impact on flavor profiles of distillates and is overlooked, but everything matters. Alan makes a good point, since we do know that different types of yeast can produce specific flavors in a whiskey. I'll cite the well-known use of 5 different yeast strains at Four Roses as just one example of that. There is plenty of room for debate on both sides. We also had this comment from @Headstone on the webcast with Mark Rainier and John Glazer. Bloody good WhiskyCast show, Mark. So interesting with wonderful guests. Pity we didn't hear a bit more from John, a hero of mine. But overall, I think that's one of the best discussions I've listened to. Many thanks indeed. Thank you for the kind words. Last time around, I shared my tasting notes for Virginia Distillery Company's new Courage and Conviction American Single Malt, and the photo I posted on social media prompted this question from Eric McKee at YYC Red in Canada. I just got confused by Virginia Distillery's spelling of whiskey on this bottle. Then I looked on their website, and that's how they spell it everywhere. Any idea of the story behind this? And for the record, they spell it without the E. And I had thought that they had once said that the Moore family, which founded the distillery, traces its heritage back to Scotland, but I was wrong on that when I responded to Eric. The distillery's social media team corrected me on it. The Moores come from Ireland, but the late Dr. George G. Moore, who decided to build the distillery, loved single malt scotches, and wanted to create an American single malt inspired by his favorite whiskies. They also had the late Dr. Jim Swan and Harry Coburn as consultants, and all of the equipment came from Forsyths in Scotland, which is why they don't use the E in whiskey. While most American distilleries do use the E, there is no official requirement that they do so. Either spelling works as far as the government's concerned. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Lot 40, Canada's 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Let's wrap things up now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and all those other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. In my introduction earlier to our tour of Gladfield Malt, I mentioned the use of enzyme additives by distillers during the mashing process, and it's worth explaining that in more detail. You see, malted barley contains a lot of what chemists refer to as diastase or amylase enzymes. They convert the starch in the grain into fermentable sugars during the mashing process. The hot water used in mashing cooks the grain, which makes it water-soluble, while enzymes break down the starch. Some of those enzymes are a natural part of unmalted barley, while the malting process produces the rest. Labs can produce those enzymes in larger quantities at a cheaper cost than using malted barley, and the so-called industrial enzymes can also be more efficient in that starch-to-sugar conversion than those found in malted barley. So, for that reason, while mash bills for bourbons, ryes, and other whiskeys may call for anywhere from 5% to as much as 15% malted barley, depending on the specific requirements, many distillers will add a few gallons or liters of liquid enzymes to their grain during mashing. Remember, they're trying to get the most amount of alcohol possible from each batch of mash. The exception, Scotland, where the use of added enzymes is not allowed. Distillers in Scotland have to work with only the natural enzymes created during the malting process. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copper Pot, an 18th century style of premium Irish whiskey, blended from single pot still and single malt. Like yourself, it's one of life's treasured rarities, and what's rare is wonderful. Writer's Tears Copper Pot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find links for our live webcasts, the WhiskyCast HD videos, and the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast. You'll also find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and a downloadable Zoom background, and of course a complete archive of past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. We'd love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter Instagram and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
From far beyond the wall comes a whiskey for those who face the oncoming storm and never stop walking. Winter is here. White Walker by Johnny Walker.
White Walker by Johnny Walker. Blended Scotch whiskey, 41.7% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
When you land on something special, you just know. Redbreast, the quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey, and a proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2020, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.